I can speak loud enough to let you know that somebody left phone in the bathroom. Anybody? When you discover that it's missing, oh, it has a beautiful red little flame. I just want to know. It's way next to the mine. Oh, is it yours? You win. Okay. How does this move up? I think I want it to be a little bit taller. I'm taller than people think I am. I've got these boots on. Cheating boots. Oh, that worked. Should we test this? Seems like it's working. Testing, testing. I knew someday someone would ask me to tell a joke when I wasn't prepared. I'll take volunteers from the audience who know jokes. You know, one or two. No. Maybe this would be a great time to remind us all to silence our phones.
Good evening, everybody. This is really wonderful to look out here and see such a packed house. So gratifying to see so much interest in this event. Thank you. I want to say good evening also to those who are joining us online. I'm delighted to announce that this is the first MIR lecture that is being live streamed. This is no easy feat, and so I want to thank Adam Thomas, John Tucker, and Terry Brennan for making this possible. I should also thank our sponsors who gave us grants for this. So we got some money from the RDCK, the RDKB, and Stellar Vista Credit Union. The reason this is all going first is just to give you fair warning that being live streamed means it's also being recorded for posterity, so be advised the cameras are rolling. I would like to now begin formally by expressing my gratitude on behalf of all of Selkirk College for the Sinixt, Ktunaxa, Syilx, and Secwepemc peoples on whose traditional territories Selkirk College is honored to operate. I'd like to also acknowledge the many Métis and Indigenous people of other nations who call this place home, and give a special acknowledgement to the Sinixt, who, as we know, are still struggling for formal recognition of their existence and rights and territory from the federal government, a struggle that bears similarity to the topic of tonight's event. My name is Jenny Barron. I am the chair of the MIR Center for Peace and one of the organizers of tonight's event. I'm also a settler in this place we call Canada, and I have roots that stretch back several centuries. Ultimately, that were English, French, and Dutch, I think. But what that means is that I feel deeply implicated in the history of colonization in this land. And I think there are probably some of you who feel that too. For me, that means struggling with some of these questions of what it means to have a home, to be of a place, belong to a land or a people, and then to think about the experiences of those who've suffered expulsion from their home, erasure, and domination by colonial powers. Hands up if other people have contemplated these questions. Right. So tonight's talk, I know, is going to give us a lot to think about in that regard. I'd like to say just a few things about what the MIR Center stands for, what we believe, and how it relates to Louis' presentation here tonight. You all received a card when you arrived, and I won't take the time to go through it word for word. You probably read it already, and I do hope that you will take it home and look at it again. I will reiterate that it's very important to us that everyone understand that we see the struggle for Palestinian rights as one that is consistent with the struggle against anti-Semitism. If we believe in security, freedom, human rights, dignity for all, then it follows that we will support both struggles. They are not in opposition to each other at all. To make that even more clear, to criticize Israel does not mean we are anti-Semitic. And we will have very shortly here a video presentation from somebody who I think can make that point more knowledgeably and eloquently than I can. Secondly, I think it's important for us to state, even though it might be obvious, that we do denounce violence on all sides, because we see it as standing in the way of a just and sustainable peace in the region. We also recognize that this is a difficult subject. There was some concern that people weren't liking our Facebook posts and they didn't want to put it out there that they supported this event. But then again, the place sold out. So there's a lot of interest, but people feel uncomfortable sometimes talking about this subject. It's obviously a very difficult problem to address when we talk about intractable conflict. This is one's at the top of the list. The history of the region is very complex. We all know there's been a great deal of violence and pain. Tonight, we are here to listen to someone who is sharing his observations on the Palestinian experience as he saw it in Hebron last December. We're not here to debate the solutions, the political solutions to this very vexing problem. We will have a question and answer at the end, and there may be some exchange of views. It's possible we'll have different perspectives shared, and that's all good. At the same time, we just encourage, we hope, that everybody will speak and listen in ways that model the kind of peaceful pluralism and openness that we all desire. So tonight's program features Louis Bockner with special guest Sid Schneid on video. He will also join us later on Zoom for the Q&A. And then we have a musical and poetic performance by Zainab Mohammed, Bessie Wap, a piece that was created specially for this event. So we're very, very honored to have their artistry enriching us all here. They'll say a few words about the collaboration, and then we will have part of that there is Louis will be giving us a bit of a backgrounder, a history and geography lesson, and then we'll have the music, and we'll have a very, very short intermission, and then the main event of the slides, which will be followed by the Q&A. So it's a packed evening. We hope that you will be comfortable, and I know that you will be enriched. At the very, very end, please make sure you stop at the table before, just on your way out, and consider picking up some of Louis' postcards. He's fundraising. This whole event is fundraising for community peacemaker teams, Hebron. And I'm pleased to announce that between last night's event in Castlegar and this one here, we've raised about $1,800 for them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I'd like to invite up Randy Jansen to introduce Louis.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay. I am still happy to be here. And I'm really happy to introduce to you Louis Bockner. Louis, many of you know Louis, and he is known in this area, born and bred, and known in this area as a photographer and a journalist. He has his own website. You can go to louisbockner.com. I visited there, and I just want to share a really nice quote from the website where it says that Louis specializes in telling stories of people and the places they shape and are shaped by, with a particular affinity for those who live close to the earth in a simple way. I first met Louis about 6 years ago, and not only does this evening's presentation fit into this quote, but also my experience meeting Louis. It was in Guatemala, actually, and Mary and I have a long-standing relationship with a cooperative there, and happened to be working with a group of young adults who were starting up a Spanish language school aimed at off the beaten track, aimed at teaching Spanish to people kind of like Louis. And who was the very first student at this Spanish language school? It was Louis. But in total characteristic of this this person, he didn't just stay and learn the language. He stayed a bit longer, and if you go to the Spanish language's website, I can give it to you if you want. All the beautiful photography on the website is by Louis, and all of the words were translated by Louis into English from Google English. So that's the type of person Louis is when he travels. Louis has accomplished the feat of publishing his articles and his photography in many different places, everywhere from the Globe and Globe and Mail to Kootenai Mountain Culture. I invite you to go to his website and see all of his future accomplishments. But without further ado, I'd love to turn the evening over to Louis. Thank you.
All right. Wow. This has all become a lot bigger and hopefully better than I had imagined it when this seed began when I was in Palestine, of which I owe a lot to Jenny and Selkirk College and the Mir Center, because they really took this on and they funded a lot of it and made it so that all the ticket sales can go to CPT, and that's just amazing. So please give Jenny a big round of applause. And thank you, Randy. There you are. It's been wonderful knowing you and traveling to these places. And as you'll soon find out, Randy and Marianne are one of the main reasons why I ended up in Palestine. But first, I'd like to just share an anecdote. Jenny spoke, I think, quite eloquently around Indigenous rights and territory and similarities across the globe. But I'd like to share a quick anecdote. Almost a year ago, May 17th, a year ago, the RCMP paid a visit to my little community of Argenta to take apart a logging protest that was up there. And they sent a special unit called the Community Industry Response Group, which is basically the specialized unit of the RCMP that specializes in enforcing injunctions against land defenders and Indigenous folks, and to pave the way for resource extraction. And they've been in 3 main places in BC. They've been in Fairy Creek, Wet'suwet'en Territory, as well as Argenta. And so I was asked to speak on a webinar about that. And on the call was a young woman named Jossie Alec, and she's from the Wet'suwet'en Territory. And she was sharing her experience of what that was like, being arrested by SERG, and also just what it's like up there since they have been there. And she talked a lot about random ID checks, areas of their traditional territory being closed off to them, and this just constant monitoring and surveillance, the halogen security lights that are blaring at all hours of the day and night. And as she spoke about that, I was just immediately taken back to my time in Hebron, in Palestine. And I think that just speaks to the similarities of settler colonialism across the globe, you know, and what that looks like. And also I think it brings up what happens when colonial nations like Britain carve up places of land that often in the Sykes-Picot case, which is the lines that divided up the Middle East following the Ottoman Turk Empire's reign. Sykes-Picot are a British and a French guy, and they had never been there. And they just drew lines on a map and said, there, that's how we're going to divide it up. And the effect that that has on the people that actually live there and the indigenous people to that place. And imagine having your territory just cut in half arbitrarily by someone far, far away. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that anecdote before I get going. And then as Jenny mentioned, being in Israel and Palestine brought up a lot of things for me as a settler being here, you know, because I was born here. This feels like my home. And I thought a lot about, now there's multiple generations of Israeli settlers being born in the West Bank. And I'd imagine for those kids and those parents, that feels a lot like their home now, regardless of how that was shaped and founded in a historical context. So it brings up a lot of questions. I think about it a lot late at night, and I don't really have many answers around that yet, but it weighs on me, and I think about it. So, yeah. I'd like to talk about why I went first, And it starts about 7 or 8 years ago. I run this little photo booth sometimes, not so much anymore, where I take people's portraits. And I was set up at Whitewater. And this guy came in and had his portrait taken. And then he looked at my business card and he said, "Oh, Bockner, are you related to Rick?" And I went, "Yeah, that's my uncle." He said, He said, "You're Jewish then, aren't you?" I said, "Well, no, I don't think so." He said, "Well, but your grandparents were." I said, "Well, I guess. I didn't know my grandfather at all. He died long before I was born, and my grandmother never really talked about that, so I don't actually know." And he said, "Well, you might apply. You should look into Birthright Israel." And I said, "Oh, yeah, what's that?" And he said, "Well, you get a 3-week all expenses paid tour to Israel, and they fly you over there, and they put you up, and it's a tour, and it's a wonderful thing." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds pretty cool. I mean, I like traveling. I don't have a lot of money. Yeah, great. I'll look that up." And at the time, I was living with my brother in Nelson, and I got home, and I said, "Hey, we don't happen to be Jewish, do we?" and he said, "No." "Why?" And I said, "Oh, have you ever heard of Birthright Israel?" And he was just like, "What? Where did you hear about that?" I was like, "Oh, this guy came into my booth and said I might be able to go on a free trip to Israel." And he was like, "Dude," and he's a lot smarter than me. He's 11 years my senior. He's very well read. He's pretty sharp when it comes to politics and global politics. And he immediately gave me 2 or 3 books and said, "You better read this and educate yourself about Palestine and Israel and what that means." And I did. And that ultimately led to my interest in Palestine and wanting to go there. And it was always a place that felt impossible to go to. It was like, how do you go there? Can you just fly there? Do you go across the border? What does that look like? So it always felt too far away, too hard to get to, maybe dangerous. If you just watch the news, it's just maybe bomb strikes and airstrikes and bus bombs and stuff. And so I always wanted to, never knew how. And then last year in the fall, Marianne and Randy, who I'd spent time with in Guatemala, I found out that they were there. And they were volunteering in the West Bank. And I thought, okay, there's an in. They went. They made it somehow. So it's possible. And so I sent them an email. And I said, "Hey, do you think maybe I could come and teach photography to the team there?" And they said, "Well, yeah, let me check." And within a day, they were like, "Yeah, absolutely. Come on down. They'll put you up in an apartment. You just got to get here. And that's all good." Whoa. And I live about the most sheltered, peaceful life you can imagine, Sir grades aside, in Argenta. And it was just, I was blown away. And it took me 3 weeks to decide to actually buy a ticket. But I did. And that led me to Hebron for 2.5 weeks of volunteering. And so I'm grateful to Randy and Marianne for saying that it would all be good and safe and that I should go and for that relationship. And I'm grateful to CPT because this Community Peacemaker teams, they're an amazing organization. They're in Lesbos, they're in Iraqi Kurdistan, they're in Colombia, they're in Canada, and they've been in Hebron since 1994. And they're a nonviolent peace organization. They do a lot of unarmed civilian peacekeeping, accompaniment, that kind of thing, a lot of monitoring, which is mostly what I did when I was there. And that's where all this money is going to. So I appreciate you for coming out and supporting them. And before I go any further, I'm not going to touch on it much because I think Jenny touched on it really well. And we have this video from Sid Schneid about why being anti-Zionist does not mean you're anti-Semitic. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. And Sid is part of Independent Jewish Voices, and that is Independent Jewish Voices Canada. That's a Canadian organization of Jewish people who support a just peace in Palestine. And he's been working in this field since the 80s, I believe. So I'm just going to get that going, and it's about 6 minutes or something.
What you're about to see is a selection of powerful images.
What you're about to see
is a selection of powerful images taken by local photographer Louis Bockner on his recent trip to Hebron in the occupied Palestinian West Bank. I visited Hebron myself many years ago as part of a solidarity trip put together by my organization, Independent Jewish Voices Canada. What I saw there was some of the most shocking instances of criminality and brutality that I have ever witnessed. Too often it is the case that partisans of Israel ignore the reality of the occupation, one of the longest sieges in modern history. On those occasions when they do respond to charges levied against Israel for this behavior, it is too often by labeling those who were making the charges as anti-Semites. My comments here are designed as a rebuttal to those charges. Anti-Semitism is hatred, hostility, and prejudice or discrimination against Jews because they are Jews. It is a form of racism akin to Islamophobia and hatred of people of Asian, African, or Latinx descent. The use of the word Semite in anti-Semitism gives the false impression that it is directed against all Semitic people, including Arabs. But the term originated in Germany in 1879 when it was coined by Wilhelm Marr to serve as a pseudoscientific term describing hatred of Jews. The expression has been used that way ever since. Anti-Jewish prejudice had its origins in the conflict between Christianity and Judaism when the church blamed Jews for the killing of Jesus. Since its inception, anti-Semitism has manifested itself in different ways, ranging from expressions of hatred or discrimination against individual Jews to organized pogroms by mobs, the police, or military forces against entire Jewish communities. Anti-Semitism often flares up in times of social and economic crisis when Jews are scapegoated as responsible for prevailing societal problems. Major instances of anti-Jewish violence and persecution include the Rhineland massacres that preceded the First Crusade in 1096, the expulsion of Jews from England in 1290, the persecution of Jews during the Black Death from 1348 to 1351, the massacres of Spanish Jews in 1391, the persecutions of the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsions from Spain in 1492, Cossack massacres in the Ukraine from 1648 to 1657, anti-Jewish pogroms in the Russian Empire in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Dreyfus Affair in France, and the Holocaust in Nazi-occupied Europe during the Second World War. Anti-Semitism is a societal ill that should be combated by progressive activists for the same reason they resist all forms of racism and discrimination. So what is Zionism? Zionism is an ideology which arose in the 19th century in Central and Eastern Europe in reaction to recurring waves of anti-Semitic violence. It espouses the establishment of and support for a Jewish state in Palestine as a means of escaping this scourge. Initially, Zionism was highly unpopular among Jews who saw it as undermining the legitimacy of their claim to citizenship in the countries where they already resided. When the British government came out in support of the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine via the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the prevailing Jewish reaction was captured in a detailed, articulate denunciation of the idea by Edwin Montagu, a Jewish member of the British government of the day. It wasn't until the Holocaust that the notion of the establishment of a Jewish state to serve as a refuge from anti-Semitism became widely accepted among Jews, and Zionism became dominant in their ranks. Ever since then, romanticized, idealized visions of a Jewish state have been promoted in Jewish communities and institutions. The impact that the creation and maintenance of such a state has had on the indigenous people who are already living in Palestine has been ignored by the proponents of the idea. In recent decades, however, there's been a growing awareness of the reality of Zionism and its devastating impact on Palestinians. Instead of addressing the related issues, however, Israel and its defenders have chosen to smear those who criticize the country's apartheid political system, which institutionalizes discrimination against its non-Jewish citizens, as well as its occupation of Palestinian lands, by conflating criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism. The growing strength of international campaigns in solidarity with Palestine, along with the rise of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS movement, has generated considerable concern in Israel and in the ranks of its Zionist supporters. Israel's gone so far as to create a government ministry to wage war on the BDS movement. Deploying Hasbara, which is a Hebrew term literally meaning information, but in practice, propaganda, it mounts campaigns to whitewash the actions of the Israeli state. Much of this involves branding criticisms of Israel as manifestations of anti-Semitism. In the past couple of years, this strategy has been aggressively promoted through the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, which has adopted a definition of anti-Semitism that focuses overwhelmingly on criticism of Israel. The goal of those who use it is to have activities such as BDS condemned as manifestations of anti-Semitism and to subject those who engage in them to legal sanctions. I'm proud to say that our organization, Independent Jewish Voices Canada, has embraced BDS as a totally legitimate tactic and is playing a leading role both nationally and internationally in opposing the outrageous IHRA initiative. Ironically and dangerously, at a time when real anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head in the world, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other prominent Zionists are embracing real anti-Semites like Donald Trump and Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, because these people enthusiastically support Israel as a state that privileges white Jews over racialized Palestinians. In conclusion, there are two essential points to make here. First, it is essential for all of us to oppose anti-Semitism the same way we oppose all forms of racism. Secondly, we must not allow the crucially important struggle for justice in Palestine to be impeded by Zionist deceptive misuse of the term. Thank you.
All right.
A little bit of, yeah, Sid can say it a lot better than I can. When I first envisioned this event, it was going to be me just reading journal entries and showing photographs, which is what the main part of it is. But I also realized that my journal entries don't provide much context for where I am or what led to the situations that I'm in and that kind of stuff. So I'd like to give just a little brief history of the region. So that's where we're talking about. That space right there. That would be the West Bank. That would be Gaza down there. Yeah. And the whole area is smaller than Vancouver Island. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, it's about 27,000 square kilometers. Vancouver Island's about 32,000. The West Bank is under 6,000 square kilometers. And Gaza is shorter than from here to Castlegar and about an average of 8 or 9 kilometers wide. So it's this tiny little strip. Yeah. So, as Sid mentioned, in the late 1800s, Zionism started to take hold in Europe. And by 1914, there was already an immigration of Jews to the region. Tens of thousands had already come by 1914. 1916 is when Sykes and Picot drew those lines following the end of the Ottoman Empire and divvied it up. By 1917, Sir Arthur Balfour signed the Balfour Declaration, supporting a homeland for Jews in the region. And by 1918 or 1920, Britain had taken control of the region. In 1922, the League of Nations approved this mandate for Palestine, which included a homeland for Jews there. And then over the next couple of decades, there was this immigration of Jews to the region, supported by the British that just continued, and Arab revolts came up against this because it was often spoken of as a land without people for a people without land, but in fact there was people there, and they weren't that excited about having their land taken away. And also there was a privatization of land during that time, which is another similarity with here. When you create privatization of land, you can then sell it, you can take it away, you now own it, which is often a concept that doesn't necessarily exist in indigenous societies. And so that also happened and expedited the displacement of indigenous Arabs as well as the immigration of Jews. Let's just see. So yeah, lots of Arab revolts. They're often quelled violently by the British military and Zionist militias. And then by 1947, after World War II, Britain's feeling a bit worn out, and they're thinking that maybe this whole colonial thing is kind of complicated and tiring. I don't know what they're thinking. But anyway, they're sort of just thinking maybe we don't want to be in the Middle East anymore. So they start trying to figure out a way out. And that's when the UN adopts this partition plan. That's the second one there. And that gives 62% of the landmass to a Jewish state. And the Arab leaders reject that, and basically violence ensues, which leads to what the Palestinians call the catastrophe, the Nakba. And during that time, which is coming up on the 75th anniversary in a few days, as well as the 75th anniversary of the founding of Israel. So during that time, there's over 750,000 Palestinians expelled from the region. There is 15,000 killed. There's over 400 villages destroyed. And there's 80% of the Arab population of what is modern-day Israel is expelled. So it's this huge clearing of space and land during that time. And when it's, let me just make sure here. Yeah, so the day after the British mandate ends, which is May 14th, the State of Israel is declared, and it's immediately acknowledged and supported by the United States and the Soviet Union. And in 1949, there's an armistice signed, and the Green Line is created, which separates modern-day Israel from the West Bank. And it's Green Line because it was drawn in green on the map at the time. And so that's in 1949. And the West Bank at that time was controlled by Jordan. Now we're going to fast forward to 1967, when the Six-Day War happened, which was June 5th to June 10th. And it was initiated between Israel and Egypt with airstrikes into the Sinai Peninsula, preemptive airstrikes by Israel into the Sinai Peninsula. And it led to the 6 days of war. And at the end of it, there was 800 Israelis killed and 20,000 Arabs killed. And Israel had taken the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, and the West Bank. So, and 250,000 Palestinians were expelled from the West Bank during that time as well. And so following that, there was a UN resolution requiring that Israel withdraw from Gaza, Sinai Peninsula, and the West Bank. They withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula, but they've never really left the West Bank, hence the term the occupied West Bank. So they never really withdrew their soldiers, and there's this continuation of settlement in the region, which is often started as a military base, which then turns into a settlement after. And at this point, there's roughly 500,000 Israelis living in the West Bank. We're going to fast forward now to 1993 and 1995, when the Oslo Accords were signed between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And they divided the West Bank into 3 areas. So Area A comes under the control of the Palestinian, then it was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, now it's the Palestinian Authority. And they are entirely under their control, although Israel maintains the right to go in as a security force at any time. And that's about 18% of the landmass of the West Bank. And then there's Area B, which is 20%, or 22%, sorry, and that's sort of a mixture. So the PLO, now the PA, they're in charge of civic duties, trash, education, municipal stuff, but Israel maintains full security control, and that's about 22%. And then Area C, which is 60%, that's under full Israeli control, and that was signed during the Oslo Accords. And I was only in Area C briefly for 2 days in the South Hebron Hills, which you'll hear about later, and it's a very different place. Like if you're in Bethlehem, it feels very much just like a city, and you're there, and it's beautiful, and I was there for Christmas of all times, and yeah, it's a happening little city, and it's if you could go there if you just kind of did this, and you'd think, wow, this is a really lovely place. In the South Hebron Hills, it's very different. It's more rural, and it's these places where there's old Palestinian villages with Israeli settlements right next to them, and so it's much more in your face, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And the term illegal settlements is talked about a lot. I'll talk about it when I'm reading in my journals. And I looked up why they're illegal, why people call them that, and it's Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, which basically states that an occupying power shall not deposit or transfer its own citizens to the region that they're occupying, which is why they often start as military bases, which are allowed, and then they turn into settlements after. And they're all over. It's not like there's one big settlement. They're all over. And it's a tactic. It's talked about by upper Israeli leaders in the past. It's called the Swiss cheese tactic. And it's basically you put them all over the place, and then they grow. And at some point, the holes become larger than what was there before. And it's effective. And they're all over. It's divided. There's different highway systems for the Israeli settlements than for the Palestinians, who have to go through military checkpoints. And there's also permit systems for the Palestinians if they want to go to Israel. Many of them have never been to Israel, to Jerusalem or Israel. And so it's this very divided space, the West Bank. And the only two countries, well, maybe not the only two, but the main two that say that they're not illegal are Israel, which isn't surprising, and the United States. And the United States have sort of sometimes almost said that they're illegal, and then they say, no, I think Obama said that they were an obstacle to peace, is what he said. Canada does say that they're illegal, but then there's not a lot of teeth behind that. So, yeah. But general consensus in the international community is that they are. Now I'm going to talk about Hebron, which is where I was. So fly into Tel Aviv, train to Jerusalem, stopped in Bethlehem for a morning, and ended up down in Hebron, which is down there. It's a large city. It's one of the largest in the West Bank, 200,000 people. It's a city of agriculture, industry, pottery, glass blowing. Yeah, it's a big place. And it is unique in the West Bank in that it's the only city that's segregated. So it's actually split. So following the second Oslo Accords in 1995, Hebron was divided into two sections. So H1 is under the Palestinian Authority. It's about 80%. There's 170,000-ish Palestinians that live there. H2 is under Israel's, it's sort of like Area B, it's under Israeli security control, but PA municipality civil control. And it's home to about 30,000 Palestinians, about 600 to 800 Israeli settlers, and about 2,000 Israeli soldiers, along with over 18 military checkpoints, one of which that you'll see a picture of, it was recently installed with a remote-controlled machine gun that can fire a variety of things from it, so it's basically an unmanned checkpoint, if it needs to be. And it's also a place that is just a state-of-the-art surveillance state. So Israel is one of the leaders in surveillance, military surveillance especially, facial recognition. And so at all these checkpoints all over this of H2 and in East Jerusalem, there's CCTV cameras, biometrics are being recorded. Amnesty International just came out with a report about the system, Blue Wolf, Red Wolf, and Wolf Pack. And let me make sure I get this right. Red Wolf is the facial recognition system. So it's biometrics, it's inputting data. It can recognize Palestinians as they come up. It can say, yep, good to go, let them through. Or it can say, no, we suspect this person. Or it can say, we don't recognize this person, in which case they'll probably be stopped and photographed, which brings up Blue Wolf, which is an app that Israeli soldiers use to take pictures of Palestinians and enter them into the system. So they can grow this big database of surveillance, which is called the Wolf Pack. And they're basically able to test these things on Palestinians because they have this captive audience or population, and then sell it internationally and say that this has been tested. This is real world tested on people here, and it works. We know it works. Here's the data to back it up. And so this is going on in Hebron and East Jerusalem. And it's a place that feels heavy, as you'll get the sense of in my journal entries. It feels heavy there. It's very in your face, the fact that there's this separation going on. And the last thing I'll talk about I lost a slide. Anyway, it's just a more detailed version of Hebron down there. But I want to talk about Shuhada Street, which comes up a lot. And it's this place that has been, this big main thoroughfare. It was the heart of the city, next to the old city, which is included in H2. And it's been closed to Palestinians since the 2000s. And that piece does so much to the city because it's the heart of the city. And when you close a main thoroughfare to 90+% of the population, that doesn't just close the street, it closed the heart of the city. And I liken it to imagine if you closed Baker Street to everyone that skis, bikes, and hikes, and maybe stand-up paddleboards. And what that would do, you close off the street, you cement block all the streets that connect to it. You put a military checkpoint at each end. It doesn't just close the street. It closes all the businesses that are next to it because people now have to walk around to get to the other side. It separates families. And it takes the heart of the city and it deadens it. And the shops that are on the street are closed by the military. The ones next to it are probably going to be closed by the business owners because nobody's coming anymore. And so around Shuhada Street and in the old city, 500+ homes have been, or businesses have been closed since then. And it feels that way. There's still some that are open. They're doing their best, but a lot of it is just this dead space. And there is a reclamation trying to happen, but it's hard there. A lot of what I did with CPT was just watch checkpoints as kids went to school. So they passed through them in the morning on their way to school. They passed through them on their way home. In the morning, often nothing happens. On the way home, often they're just closed for no reason. So the army just closes them. And these kids, kindergarten all the way up, are just waiting for an hour more, just waiting to go home. And it's just this way of controlling people and controlling time and controlling lives and controlling space. And that's a lot of what we did, is just watch and record numbers and bear witness. And I think that having a presence there, especially as a white person, does make a difference in that situation, you know? It's just this monitoring thing. But that's a lot of what I did. I did teach some photography. And yeah, I think that's all I really need to say. Oh, the last thing I'll just say is the more modern day reality, which is this new government was elected right as I was going there. This the 6th time that Netanyahu's been elected prime minister of Israel. And in order to get elected, he formed with this very right-wing coalition. There's people in that coalition that really wouldn't have been allowed near politics not that long ago, and now they're running national defense and finance and that kind of stuff. And they're these really extreme far-right Zionists, and they're openly racist, they're openly homophobic. And that's the government that's in play right now. And it's getting worse there. If you tune into the news, I'm sure you've heard it. It's getting worse, and the violence is increasing. The last numbers I heard was that there was 130 Palestinians killed this year alone. Last year was 200. That was a bad year. 130, I think, in the last 4 days. There's been more. And so violence is increasing on both sides, but predominantly it's Palestinians being killed. And so it's getting worse, and it's getting worse quickly. And people that I talked to there, it was like, maybe this is a silver lining. Maybe this is what needs to happen. It needs to get worse for the international community to no longer be able to ignore what's happening. And there's maybe some signs that that's happening. There's definitely signs within Israel. There was 100,000 people protesting in Tel Aviv about Supreme Court reforms a few months ago. So there's these massive protests, which didn't really have anything to do with the treatment of Palestinians, but had to do with the government trying to check the power of the Supreme Court to check the government. And so they're worried that it's getting so out of control that it may affect them in Israel. And so that's what's going on right now. It is getting worse. Whether it leads to it getting better, I don't know. But that's sort of the reality happening now. This concludes the historical facts, numbers portion of the evening. And we are going to now move into the more emotive, perhaps artistic and performance part of the evening. And to start that, I'm going to invite Zainab Mohammed, who is a professional poet, and Bessie Wapp, who's a wonderful musician and performance artist. And they've put this piece together. And Zainab's grandmother was from Palestine. She left basically during the Nakba, right before. And Bessie's roots go back to Eastern European Jews. So they've put together these two pieces that they're going to play for you right now. And I'm so grateful that they're here adding their art to this evening. It feels very good to have that. So please welcome them.
Good evening, everyone.
Zainab was going to talk first.
I am going to talk first. I'm known for my moments of silence, my pregnant pauses. I just like to feel, to be here and feel here with all of you. And I like for things to come out for it to not be so orchestrated. The art is orchestrated, but what comes from my heart. Wow, this is our fourth show. This is my fourth show with Louis. We did 2 shows in Kaslo a couple weeks ago, and we did a show in Castlegar last night, and here we are. And I did not know how fucking painful this was gonna be, like how hard this was gonna be. Everyone's like, oh, you're gonna do great, and like have a great time, and it's it's really great. It is a great time, I guess. Maybe no, not really. It's special to be collaborating with Bessie. It's also hard. Like, she has Jewish ancestry, and I think once upon a time we were probably neighbors, like all around the world in some ways or another, and but it is hard. Like, I grew up in a very specific way, and Israel was always the enemy. Like they kicked us out, you know, like we have been displaced from Palestine, and we have been displaced from, my mom was born in Lebanon and she was displaced from Lebanon because of Israel. And then my dad is from Iraq and he was displaced from Iraq because of the Saddam Hussein regime. And like, here we are in Canada, and the First Nations are displaced. If they're not like in reservations or minorities and communities, they're in prisons. They fill most of the prisons here. Like, and they make up like what, 3 to 6% of the population in Canada, and they make up like 50% of people in prison, which is ridiculous and a tragedy. And so with all this, it feels like such a gift that Louis has brought me into this. Like, I was born on the coast in BC, and we were the only, like, definitely the only Muslim family, the only brown family, like very different and weird compared to everyone else. Like being a kid, you know, like you want to be like everyone else. And so when I was 11 years old, I found out that Palestine didn't exist anymore, even though my grandmother was born there, because in our classroom, we had this big map on the wall, and the teacher gave us little stickers, like little red stickers, green stickers, and blue stickers. And the teacher said, now put a sticker where your mom and your dad were born, put a sticker, you know, like the set of colors where your grandparents were born from your mom's side and your dad's side, and we'll see where we're all from around the map, you know, like it was this multicultural exercise. And so I went up onto the map and I like put all the stickers, and I was looking for Palestine. I knew it was right under Lebanon. And I was like, Israel. I'm like, where's Palestine? And I like looked and looked. I knew it was there. I'm like, maybe I don't know where it is. And after some time, I went up to my teacher and I said, hey, like my grandma's from Palestine. I can't find it on the map. He's like, well, it doesn't exist anymore. It's Israel. And I was 11, and that made no sense. And so, yeah, tell me about it. And so it's been a topic that's like unspoken in this culture, and it's been a taboo. Like my grandmother didn't talk about it to her kids because it was a bad thing to be Palestinian. Like it was, you know, just like Indigenous folks here that I've met, it was like we've been shamed of our identity almost, or somehow, or I don't know if those are the right words, but that's what I've heard here. Like people hide who they are rather than pride who they are, and where they come from and what that means. And so I'm so thankful. This is such a gift, Louis. This has been such a gift. Thank you so much. Like, it's painful and hard, and I'm happy you're all here being part of this conversation because it's, for me, it's about time. Like, I'm in my 30s, and I've never had this conversation publicly until these last couple of weeks. And I've wanted to, but I've also been scared or ashamed, or, you know, don't want to I rocked the boat enough. Don't, you know, like anyways, thank you all for being here. Off to you, Bessie.
Well, I don't have as much to say. I was debating whether to tell you all that I have a migraine headache, and I thought, well, I will tell you because it's sort of like my method acting approach to what it's like to have something really painful and continuous and oppressive going on in you, around you. So I share that. My ancestors are from Eastern Europe, Jews from Eastern Europe, and I do have relatives in Israel, but the situation there is so much more removed for me. I don't have, you know, lived experience of this, but I do. I was so grateful to be invited to do this because it feels like a real privilege and an honor to get to be the person who represents. You know, here I am, I'm representing, and with a wonderful artist So that's probably all I need to say.
I don't want to be angry. I don't want to add to the pain of the world when I speak. I want my words to be like seeds that blossom into orchards of fruit trees, that feed people sweetness for generations to come. I want my words to be like blooming flowers being pollinated by bees when they meet your ears, so that the continuum of magic spreads, so that our hearts are filled with sights of how precious each breath gives us another moment to appreciate life. Because the pain is real. And when I'm not looking, I remember my roots, the woman before me, and how being a woman was never a good thing, was never celebrated, praised, or respected. At least if it was. I wasn't taught or shown that the blood that rushes out of me every month is the most fertile part of my being, that this is what carries the seed of life in it, that I am like that fruit tree. I am like every blooming flower, though not pollinated. I still blossom and shine because that's who I am, a life giver. I am a woman with a womb, with a story, who is searching to relieve the pain that I carry. Because this doesn't feel okay. This doesn't feel okay. To be woman is not to feel pain, but somehow, since birth, I was told to stay small, to be quiet, to cover my skin, to hide my emotions, to not be who I am, but who they think I should be. You see, I have set myself free, and now I am freeing my story. Because orchards are in droughts. In my homeland, on my family's orchard, during the Civil War and the Israeli invasion, the fruit trees that my grandfather planted were cut down for firewood. So when I go to visit, the land is bare, overgrown with weeds and thorns and layered with bullet shells. Last time I was in Lebanon, I spent 6 months in our village. During that time, an old woman came back after 40 years of not stepping foot in her home there. Do you want to know why? Because 40 years prior, there was a civil war. And during that time, she was witness to her family members being murdered. She escaped the bloodbath. She became a nun. She dedicated her life to serving children. And when she was ready to return to the scene of the crime, I was there. She knew my mom. She knew our whole family from over 40 years ago. I sat with her on her deck. She gave me a tour of her home and shared her story with me. You see, this is 1 in a million, 1 in millions. These stories continue to this day because orchards are in droughts, being cut down for firewood. Orchards are in droughts, being cut down for firewood. I will not end my story as ashes to fertilize land. I will take these ashes and revive them like an alchemist. I will turn these ashes into words. I will blow these words into intrinsic landscape made ecosystem. I will plant orchards because I don't want to be angry. What I add to this world in this blip of a moment while I'm living, I want it to be beautiful. I want my words to be like sweet fruit, to be enjoyed and digested into life juice, the sustenance we need to move through fields of dried up orchards being cut down for firewood. I want to be part of planting a legacy that surpasses war and human greed, that goes beyond you and me and becomes a gateway for what we can't even imagine yet. A world where beauty is so intoxicating we become drunk poets, piercing through the veil of audacity and transforming our pain into beauty, into magic, into possibility. I want my words to set me free, to let me see that I am beautiful. Not despite the pain, but because of it, because I never let it steal my heart. And although it hurt, and still hurts, to pass through the eye of the needle, I did it. I learned how to look at my pain, how to feel it, how to thank it, and how to use it as the ink that I write my poetry with.
And now we are going to both sing a song in Hebrew and in Arabic. And the first version was written, I think, in the 80s in Israel as part of a thing called, what was it called? Child Vision, I think. Yeah. Peace Child Israel. But I guess at that time the song was a little heavy on the Jewish side. And so then for Peace Child 2000, the writers brought in Arabic musicians too, Arabic singers and Arab musicians, and kind of expanded it so it was a bit more balanced. And so in the chorus, the Hebrew part says, "We brought peace upon us," and the Arabic part says, "There is nothing more beautiful than peace." And yeah, that's probably all you need to know. יש בינינו חיבורים שהורינו לא הלמו, יש בינינו דיבורים שאת כל לא נשמעו, אנחנו כאן בשביל כולם, אנחנו גשר וסולם, בשמי ושישלם, בשביל מי שהלם. ועוד בהיינו ועוד בהמנו נשיר בקולנו, אבינו שלום, אבינו שלום עלינו, אבינו שלום עלינו, שלום עלינו, אבינו שלום עלינו, אבינו שלום עלינו, אבינו שלום עלינו, שלום עלינו.
ايدك لو بيبقى عيدي ايمانك والاحلام، من عمر دنيا جديدة، دنيا تحب والسلام. لما النية تتصافى كل الناس بيبقوا ناس، من سيرة العيلة الحب عيلة بتشرب من كاس، من كاس السلام، من كاس السلام، من كاس السلام. ما أنا أجمل من سلام، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، أجمل من سلام، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، أجمل من سلام. כן הורינו כבר אכלו בוסר עד אתמול שלשום, אך שינינו תתפללו לא תהיינה עוד היום. سوا من وحد القلوب، سوا من نور العقول، مع الأولاد السلام، مع الأولاد الأحلام. من كاس السلام، من كاس السلام، من كاس السلام. ما أنا أجمل من سلام، هذين شالوم علينا، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، شالوم علينا، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، هذين شالوم علينا، ما أنا أجمل من سلام، شالوم علينا، أجمل من سلام، شالوم من سلام.
Thank you, Bessie, for representing through your pain. And thank you, Zainab, for freeing your story. Let's hear it again for them. We're going to take very, very brief intermission, no more than 10 minutes, and then we'll be back for Postcards from Palestine.
There we go. Yeah, the other events we didn't do an intermission, and last night it was feeling a little long, so it's good to take a little break. So now I'm going to go into my actual part of the evening, the original vision of the evening. And there's two things I want to say before I start. And the first is that I'm a journalist. This, what I'm about to do, is not a piece of journalism. This is what I wrote in my personal journal when I was there. And this is my experience when I was there. This is what I felt, what I saw. And the photos are what I saw, a representation of that. And it was a largely Palestinian-informed experience. And I just feel like I need to say that, you know. And then the other thing I want to say is that after this, you might leave just going like, whoa, that is hell on earth. Or I don't know what you might leave feeling like. But it's fairly heavy. It's fairly somber, a lot of it. And I just want to address the fact that there was joy there and there was a lot of beauty there. And I've never seen people laugh as much as the Community Peacemaker team, who's from Hebron. And they laugh all the time, and they're the most joyful people I've ever met, and the Palestinians in the streets are the most welcoming people I've ever met, and there's beauty in these, you'll see the olive trees, they're just incredible, and I allude to it a little bit, but largely what I wrote down was heavy. And I think that's partially because it was just me processing. And so I just want to speak to that, because that is there, and is alive, and it also is no excuse for an occupation. The fact that people are still creating beauty and love and all of that, you know? I think that's important. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say. So we'll begin now. Can you bring down all the lights, please, John? Thank you. December 10th, Hebron. I wake to morning prayer, the eerie foreign hymns pealing over the city and in through the plastic-covered windows of my bedroom. I feel at ease despite the distance from home and all things familiar. After a long journey, Argenta, Calgary, London, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Hebron, I feel rested now, settled in, ready for what the weeks ahead will bring. December 11th. Again, morning prayer wakes me in darkness. I'm tired again. One good night's sleep isn't enough, and last night I stayed up, energized by the newness of a day that culminated in raucous celebrations following Morocco's win over Portugal in the World Cup quarterfinals. People pouring into the streets of Hebron amid the blares of car horns and fireworks. After I was wired, editing photographs and watching the England versus France game in my apartment. Yesterday was my first real day on the ground, and after the weekly team meeting that happens every Saturday, Ahmad and I went out into the old city to monitor a possible settler incursion. On most Saturdays, Israeli settlers living in the West Bank take a guided tour of the old city. It's like any other tourism tour, with a guide leading a group of people through a place, speaking about history and landmarks. Except here, the group is surrounded by soldiers from the Israeli Defense Force in full combat uniform. They block off the narrow streets, obstructing the movement of Palestinians and removing Palestinian flags, surveying rooftops and alleyways through the sights of their Tavon X-95 assault rifles. The soldiers outnumber the 20 or so settlers 2-1. We followed the trailing group of a half dozen soldiers, stopping when they stopped, moving when they moved, always maintaining a 5 to 10 meter distance. I was nervous to take photos, even though it technically isn't illegal. Ultimately, I don't want to cause more problems than what the photos are worth. Instead, I aimed from the waist, focusing manually, guessing composition and exposure. The part that shocked me the most is the third party that followed with us. A pack of Palestinian boys, maybe a half dozen, between the ages of 5 and 10, a few riding bicycles. While we hung back, nervous and silent, they walked directly up to the soldiers, inches from the muzzles of their guns. They chattered at them, making jokes, asking questions, waving, blowing kisses. This is clearly a Saturday routine, like watching cartoons or playing pickup soccer. An interaction that left my heart racing and neck hair on end is completely normalized for them. If they were afraid, they didn't show it. The soldiers themselves are hardly more than children, 18 to 20-year-olds who have been given all the power in the world and imparted with the most dangerous of ideas, that their existence matters more than someone else's. On school watch, children passing through a militarized checkpoint on their way to kindergarten, first grade, and on and on. Gates are locked, access denied on a whim, no reason necessary. Crowds of students gather, waiting to continue on with their day, amid the concrete and cinder block mass of the city, between the endless garbage and razor wire, are glimpses of what could be, a pomegranate tree in its red-fruited glory seen through a rusted gate, a grapevine ascending 3 stories up a crumbling apartment building to offer shade to a rooftop patio. Baha and I talk while he waits for a taxi after work. He lives outside of Hebron, along the main highway to Jerusalem, near an illegal settlement. Because of this, he doesn't feel safe taking the bus and then walking, so he pays out of pocket for a private taxi instead, costing him over $20 a day. Community peacemaker teams used to pay for some transit costs along with meals and self-care days, but they no longer have the budget. It's obvious that the team here is short-staffed and overworked. The younger people, Amira, Shahad, Ahmad, Tartil, seem more able to deal with the workload and heavy nature of it. But Baha carries the weight differently. He also has more personal responsibility, living with his mother, who recently had a cancerous tumor removed. He's also lived abroad, in France mostly, and perhaps that has denormalized the situation here. If apartheid is all you know, it's all you know. 3 months ago, he was walking home from the bus stop when an Israeli soldier stopped him, demanding he put his bag down, take off his jacket, and put up his hands. When he asked for ID, Baha gestured toward the bag, and the soldier pulled his gun, shouting for him to freeze. After dumping his bag out and checking his papers, he was let go. But since then, he's taken the taxi. We talk about the situation, the complexities of it, the politics between Palestine, Israel, and neighboring countries. He doesn't see a 2-state solution as possible. He believes there needs to be one state, call it Israel, call it Palestine, call it something else. But dividing such a small country won't work, especially with the illegal Jewish settlements scattered throughout the West Bank. Arabs and Jews and Christians need to live together as they have in the past. He doesn't understand why they can't pray together to different gods. Come, he says to an imaginary soldier, put down your weapons, take off your military clothes, and pray to whatever God you want to pray to. December 12th. I sit under an olive tree, its ancient, twisted roots beneath me. Hebron spreads out below us, waking slowly with dawn. A dog barks, roosters call and respond. The street lights switch off in unison. There are no honks of impatient drivers yet, only the rush of cars on open streets. From here, in this grove of olives, with the sky beginning to glow and the twitter of birdsong raining down, one could feel this is a place of peace. But it would be a supreme exercise in amnesia, a master class in forgetting. Forget the glare of white halogen lights behind you, where the soldiers overtook a building once used to teach Palestinian youth about their culture. Forget the checkpoint, with its 100 eyes and iron mouth you had to pass through to get here. Forget the turning bars you pushed through once you were beckoned forward by a teenager in army fatigues, cradling an assault rifle. Forget placing the creased copy of your photocopy of your passport up against the bulletproof glass between you so they could see who you are and where you're from. If you can forget all of that and then 1,000 things more, if you can forget about the occupation and the civilians killed and the primary school students detained and searched on their way to school, then yes, you might be fooled into thinking this olive grove, soon to be pierced by the morning sun, is a place of peace. In another time, I imagine it was. In another time, I imagine it could be once more. December 14th. Yesterday morning, after recording the school run, Tartil took me on a walk to the Kiryat Arba settlement, one of the first in the West Bank. It sits across an agricultural valley from Hebron, cold, square apartment buildings rising up against the blue sky of morning. In the valley bottom are rows of olive trees and grapevines. Settlers always seem to occupy the high ground, asserting dominance by living in physical hierarchy, the rises in topography and tops of buildings, looking down on their Arab neighbors. Gravity works wonders. Shit rolls downhill. Garbage is thrown into Palestinian yards from settler balconies. A ceiling of netting, fence wire, and tarps create a tunnel in the winding alleyways of the old city, acting as a barrier against the trash raining down on the market stalls, vendors, and patrons. Water bottles, combs, a broken fan, tattered clothes, soiled diapers, bicycle rims, all suspended above the heads of the Palestinians moving below. Walking back to the old city after watching the soccer game at a roundabout. Morocco finally lost to the juggernaut France in the semifinals, so the streets are more subdued, but still full of people, almost exclusively boys and young men. They disperse into the night, going any direction except the old city. Why would they? There's nothing there at this hour. In the quiet street, I fall in step with 3 men. They speak to me in Arabic and eventually start talking about hashish, miming, smoking, and sniffing. They laugh. I laugh. I want to separate myself from them, but I can't. The young one has a box cutter, using it to slice an avocado. I'm nervous. The oldest one mimes sleeping. I nod. Yes, I'm going to sleep. No, he shakes his head. Can he come and sleep where I'm sleeping? I shake my head back. Finally, they run into someone they know and stop to talk. I continue on, gradually quickening my pace. After I put a bit of space between us, they call to me, asking me to wait. We come, we come. I don't know what to do. Then an ear-shattering bang shakes me from my indecision. A stun grenade, 20 or 30 meters down the street, in the direction I'm going. Right where the Israeli settlement and the guarded gates with the glaring blue lights are. I stop and see 2 people run into an alley. I keep walking, close to the wall, trying to see if there are soldiers or settlers. Smoke lingers in the air. I too could go up the alley and try to find my way home circuitously, but I'd likely get lost in the cobblestone maze of the old city. Instead, I stop and wait. The hashish men overtake me, proceeding cautiously, then motioning for me to come. They go ahead, and I follow. Soldiers peer through the razor wire topped gates, guns ready. Behind the second-story fence, decorated in tattered Israeli flags, a small group of settlers yell at us. I walk past, smelling the acrid smoke of a stun grenade for the first time. The line between comfort and alarm is unknowably thin, the violence arbitrary and always standing by. There are no guarantees that you'll get to work or school on time, that your house will still be there when you get home, that your mother and father will be waiting for you, or if they'll be waiting for you for the rest of their lives. But life persists under the direst of circumstances, in the desolate heat of the parched desert, in the absolute darkness of a cave kept hot by the core of the earth, in the black depths of the ocean and the oxygen-depleted heights of mountain ranges, there is life. And here too it glows, laughter spilling out of windows, children playing soccer under streetlights, people haggling over fresh fruit and used clothes within sight of a monolithic military base. December 15th. It's impossible to visit Hebron without imagining what it was like before the 1997 segregation, Before main arteries were closed to Palestinians, walls built to block connecting streets, the front doors of dozens of businesses welded shut. Before checkpoints sprouted and CCTV cameras recorded every moment within H2, the new Israeli Defense Force controlled quarter. Of course, they took the heart of the city, for that is where all the blood courses from, where the heritage is, where the roots draw their nutrients from. Then they took the eyes, the hilltops that look down, the 2- and 3-story buildings, where they strung razor wire like picket fences around the perimeters. Instead of patio string lights, they placed the halogen bulbs of security, illuminating Palestinian bedrooms, eradicating the darkness of night. The before is unimaginable to anyone who wasn't there to see it, and every year the number of Hebron's residents who haven't grows, while the number who have declines. Like our disappearing natural world, how can we fight for something we have never experienced, or rebuild something we have never known? I asked Baha what the city was like before segregation. He's the only team member who has memories of that world. He remembers the bustling Shahada Street, how it was a main thoroughfare lined with busy shops day and night. Then the shutdown came in response to the Second Intifada. First, Palestinians just couldn't drive there, but soon even their feet were denied access. 500 shops were closed. Doors forcibly welded shut by the military, or simply closed by their owners, because there's no point in being open for business if no one comes. Livelihoods and lifelines clamped by the occupation, a main artery, all but bled dry. Now it's quiet. A few settlers walk down it. A group of soldiers in running wear jog by beneath dozens of Israeli flags, drooping in the stillness of morning. Across from the shuttered shops is the Muslim cemetery where Baha's father is buried. To visit him now, Baha must walk around through checkpoints to access it from above. There are no accidents in these decisions. They are tactically brilliant, blows to the solar plexus of an unwanted people. Deport them all to Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, says one commenter on a Washington Post article about the madness of Hebron. They are terrorists, and they don't belong here in the homeland of God's chosen people. At the morning school run, 2 boys throw rocks at the checkpoint. They turn and run before the projectiles land a dozen meters short of their target. Ahmad imparts quiet wisdom as we smoke shisha in the office after the day's work is done. We have to remind ourselves that it's not in our power to end the occupation. We can only provide advocacy through our work, he says. That helps shift the feeling of guilt and the pressure of always doing more. We can only do what we can. He's right. It isn't in the Palestinians' hands, nor is it in mine. I can amplify voices, push the narratives of those living under occupation, but I cannot end it. December 16th. After monitoring morning prayer with Ahmad, I go up on our roof for sunrise. Our neighbor, the daycare teacher with the hoarding problem, an ancient mother who gardens on the rooftop, is burning garbage. She welcomes me in English, asking if I came up because of the smoke. Her English is the best I've encountered since being here. Ahmad makes us all coffee and we stand in the morning sun. She talks about how it was before 1997, before 1967. She used to catch the bus across the street to go to Jerusalem. Now the bus stop is a military base. She used to walk to the second-hand market in 15 minutes. Now it takes 45 because of the closed roads. Her mother remembers relationships between Jews and Muslims, a Palestinian man who butchered all the meat for his Jewish neighbors during their holidays because they wouldn't trust anyone else. Families who babysat each other's children. Jews and Muslims who were milk brothers and sisters because their mothers would nurse each other's babies. The current division, with its hard lines and seemingly impassable boundaries, is both very real and also by design. December 17th. The days are starting to wear on me. Initially, I had said I didn't want to take a day off because I'm only here for 2.5 weeks. Now, after a week, I feel run into the ground. The combination of my experience here with the instability at home is becoming overwhelming, my capacity dwindling, days and nights seeming to stretch on forever. Yesterday's clashes left me hopeless in a new way. The routinely repeated act of war games between teenagers. On one side, Palestinians throw stones. On the other, soldiers fire tear gas canisters and stun grenades while snipers shoot rubber-tipped bullets. After lunch on Fridays, boys and young men with the day off congregate at the border of H1 and H2, the two halves of Hebron. Sometimes they light a tire or two on fire, or a pile of boxes. A couple guys do donuts in a car. They gather concrete and stones, breaking them up into projectile-sized pieces, and hurl them at the Bab al-Zawiya checkpoint, or at groups of soldiers gathered on the streets leading to the old city. A few have slings, which guarantee higher velocity with decreased accuracy. The whole thing appears pointless, an act of insolence and insubordination towards an occupation that has bowed their heads and made them second-class citizens from birth. Never will a stone damage a checkpoint, nor will one seriously injure a soldier dressed in full combat gear, protected by helmets, visors, knee pads, bulletproof vests, and riot shields. The only direct consequence of their action is the complete shutdown of the old city, where hours before there were hundreds of vendors selling everything from produce to live pigeons. Now the streets are deserted. This is the equivalent to their Saturday afternoon, a prime time for life and livelihood. I asked Ahmad why they do it. Don't they see it's useless? How can you fault them for fighting back against the occupation, he asks. Fueled by a powerful mixture of testosterone and deeply embedded traumas acquired by lifetimes spent in submission, necks bent beneath the weight of military control, witnessing covert and overt violence against themselves and their loved ones. You cannot blame the oppressed for their responses against their oppressors, regardless of how violent or pointless they may seem. Systemic racism and oppression will inevitably elicit action, whether nonviolent or not. On this Friday, after 100 stones were thrown, one shot rang out. A rubber-tipped bullet fired from within the checkpoint struck a child in the hip. His compatriots scatter. He's taken to the hospital. Saturday afternoon, and we wait for the settler incursion, the weekly military-guided tour into the old city. Maybe today they won't come. They take some Saturdays off, leaving the old city vendors and residents guessing. Business continues as usual. Families wander through the stalls, down the stone streets. A boy offers me bracelets with the colors of Palestine, black, green, white, and red. A woman hawks sweets and baked goods. I mail my postcards and buy pomegranate and orange juice mixed together. This morning I facilitated the team meeting, offering a reflection on identity and labels. How do we identify and label others? How do we identify and label ourselves? How does that affect the way others see us? How does that affect how we see others? The team speaks of making the effort to see the person behind an Israeli soldier, but all admit that it's difficult when they are the spear tip of the occupation. They acknowledge that they are more than just soldiers. They are fathers and sisters and sons and mothers. They might be artists or musicians or writers, but they are born into circumstances that have led to their forced enlistment. They have been told an alternate story, one that makes their service necessary, their violence heroic, their injustice just. December 19th. Back in the olive grove in the early morning. It's my refuge in the city. Without it, I would feel more frayed and run down than I already do, more raw and emotionally ransacked. I took half of one of my precious sleeping pills last night and slept for 10 hours, waking only once to go pee and listen to early prayer. They're magic, those little pills. I only have 5 half doses left, so I use them sparingly, reserving them for those times when I most need my mind to turn off and rest. Walking through the Muslim cemetery on my way to the olive trees, I was left with a great sense of sadness. People cut off from their dead, connection to ancestry severed. Sure, they can still access it if they walk around the city and enter from the back or side, but this is more than an inconvenience. It's a statement of control. Not only do we control your everyday lives, we control your ceremonies and rituals, your losses and grieving. Even as your body makes its last journey across this earth, carried by those you love and love you in return, you will travel according to our laws on the streets we choose. Because of the inaccessibility, the cemetery feels neglected. Litter piles up in corners, of broken headstones rest atop graves. Once tiled walkways that wind between the cement boxes marking graves are now mostly disheveled and dislocated. It is still beautiful, or at least, like the rest of Hebron, alludes to the beauty that was. Juniper trees with their pale blue cracked berries and pines with scaled red bark rise 10 to 20 meters amid the graves. The headstones, large pale tiles held almost vertically by stones or mortar, are etched in the elegant calligraphy of Arabic. Like the olive grove above, they face east, catching the first light from the sun as it rises over the city skyline. As I wander through, so do handfuls of children on their way to school, carrying their backpacks and laughing amongst themselves. December 20th. I'm on the morning school run, monitoring the Abu Rish checkpoint with Ahmad when we find out about Nasser Abu Hamaid's death. He was a jailed Palestinian freedom fighter who died from cancer after years of not receiving proper treatment while in the custody of the Israeli state. Kids start pouring out of the schools they'd just entered, amassing in the street, joyously, before slowly scattering in different directions. Word of a strike spreads quickly. The whole West Bank is rising in protest of Nasser's death. Schools and businesses will close. Speeches and marches will be organized. Ahmad knows immediately what this will mean. Actions and altercations across the city. We had planned to travel to the South Hebron Hills this afternoon, but instead decide to stay to document whatever unfolds. It starts on the way home when the sting of residual tear gas hits our eyes and throat. We pull out handkerchiefs to cover our mouths, and Ahmad dips into a pharmacy to buy alcohol swabs. As we approach the Salamaya checkpoint, we find it closed, with a dozen men and a few school children waiting. After 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, they grow restless, demanding answers. There were kids throwing stones, so we had to close it, the soldier on the elevated guard post yells down at them. But the kids are gone, they respond, and we haven't done anything. The back and forth continues. More people come, a couple leave. Aside from the soldier in the tower, the checkpoint appears deserted. Then 2 soldiers arrive. If they're 20 years old, it's not by much. They remind me of the popular girls from high school who I never quite understood. Only they have machine guns and bulletproof helmets. One comes forward and yells at a young man in Hebrew, reaching through the bars to grab him, trying to pull him into the steel gate. He pushes her away. Tensions rise. The half-dozen kids back away. The most vocal of the waiting men has been calling people on 2 cell phones. Now he starts speaking in English. Maybe because he doesn't speak Hebrew and she doesn't speak Arabic, or maybe because I'm there. He talks about human rights and how they can't be treated like animals. Her hand reaches forward, fingers grasping a steel bar, illuminated by a ray of morning light. She's wearing fingerless black gloves, revealing green, pointed, claw-like gel nails. I hesitate taking the photo, not wanting to aggravate an already volatile situation. And then her hand is gone, along with the moment, imprinted on my mind, but not my camera. Another soldier comes forward, yelling at the crowd to get back, but nobody moves. We're not doing anything, the man says. We're human beings. We have rights. She's losing her temper, threatening to use force, gesturing with her gun, pointing it through the bars, telling her companion to open the gate so she can come into the crowd. I raise my camera, hoping to capture her eyes, lit by the light piercing the slits in the bars. I take a photo. I know I'm not close enough, but I don't want to be any closer. She yells at me in Hebrew. I shrug. You speak English, she asks. I nod. You want to take my picture, she shouts. You want to take my fucking picture? Come here then. She beckons me forward, daring me to move. No thanks, I say. Come here, take my picture. That's okay. I'm happy here. I wonder what would happen if I moved forward. Would she grab me, pull me in, take my camera, detain me? Soon after, they open the checkpoint, allowing a couple of people at a time to pass through. The adults are searched, their IDs recorded, while the kids walk in small groups and offer up their backpacks to be emptied. I wonder what they're thinking. Are they scared? Or is this so routine that it will hardly be mentioned when they get home? Ahmad and I wait until almost everyone has gone through before turning around. We'll take a cab around to the entrance of the old city, he says. We could go through, but they'll just harass us. I nod, thankful we didn't get detained. The drive around through the winding streets of the Palestinian-controlled H1 district takes longer than if we had walked, giving me plenty of time to reflect on what just happened. Above all, I'm amazed by the composure of the people waiting outside the gate, despite threats of violence and provocation. On one hand, I see the simple act of peacefully standing their ground as an incredible and virtuous feat of humanity. On the other hand, I see their restraint as evidence of the incredible power imbalance they live beneath and understand deeply, where fighting back, even in self-defense, can only lead to being detained, arrested, or killed. I think about the words of the man, spoken calmly, yet with the obvious frustration of someone who has dealt with these arbitrary acts of control for decades. We're human beings. We have rights. It's a statement that should be undeniable in its truth, but here, in this segregated city, on occupied ground, the sentence feels like a plea or a dream. December 21st. The Barons direct traffic on solstice morning as children walk to school. Their presence is one of the most positive things I've seen during my time here, an example of a hyperlocal initiative that uses the respect of elders to minimize conflict. Sure, they also threaten potential troublemakers with their canes and walking sticks, but I'd rather have them threatening my kid than a hot-headed or terrified Israeli defense soldier. They look stately in their heavy robe-like coats. Mostly they talk amongst themselves, but from time to time they move students along or give a rebellious young one shit for picking up a rock. Shahad says that since they took up their post below Abu Rish checkpoint earlier this year, there have been less clashes between children and soldiers. Even yesterday, when the schools abruptly went on strike, spilling hundreds of young boys into the street, they kept things from bubbling over, at least here at this checkpoint. As with many of the world's problems, I see the way forward as a combination of local solutions and national pressure on governments. The bigger, broader issues can feel too overwhelming for the average person to affect, but the localized solutions are visible. From here on the ground, I can't see the presence of the UN or the BDS movement, but I can see the barons on the corner, keeping the peace and influencing the next generation. In the South Hebron Hills, we speak with Fured, an activist and community leader in the small village of Etwane. He offers us sweet tea and white plastic chairs on a deck covered in the thin, green, fake lawn so common around here. Behind him, concrete pillars and rebar break the skyline, a new building in the face of increased uncertainty. Yesterday, the IDF demolished a barn for chickens and sheep. Organizations and people can't do anything to stop these acts of violence, only provide support to families before, during, and after. Across the valley, the illegal settlement of Ma'on, founded in 1987, is visible. Demolishing chicken coops and greenhouses seems petty, but it's actually a strategy to cut off people from their livelihoods while maintaining some semblance of credibility. I mean, it's not like they're demolishing homes or schools, except they do that all the time. 6 months ago, they broke a man's leg at a demolition. Yesterday, they put the same man in the hospital again. Life is hard here. No hospitals, no public transport, and few schools. Even fewer that aren't under threat of demolition. This is the frontier, where Palestinian villagers live shouting distance from Israeli settlements, under the supervision of military overseers. The landscape is barren, at least now as they wait for the overdue winter rains. Plantations of scrawny olive trees dot the hillside. The ubiquitous rock terraces serve the dual purpose of clearing land and creating level ground for yards, gardens, and houses among the rolling landscape. It is the land of rock as much as the land of olives. Patches of shade roll across the landscape. A child cries, chickens squawk. A lone car drives slowly along the winding 2-lane road that connects this remote enclave with the outside world. Fured says that they used to have Israeli activists here before COVID, but it's not the same as foreigners who provide a higher level of protection from settler and military violence than Palestinians and even Israelis. A young man with a bandaged foot comes on crutches to deliver more cigarettes to Fured. He smoked 3 in the 20 minutes since we started talking. Soon he opens the pack and lights up a 4th. He talks about the large building that's under construction in the valley below, an olive processing plant that will be used by the surrounding villages. The sun emerges from the clouds long enough for me to take off my jacket. He smokes a 5th cigarette and tells us that he's trying everything to raise awareness and keep people's eyes here on this remote corner of the West Bank. Her. To be born here is the antithesis of my own birth. If I was born under a full moon, the children of Her are born under a lunar eclipse. If I was born under the height of summer, they are born in the darkest days of winter. They are born terrorists, unrighteous in the eyes of the Israeli state and its laws, and whether or not I or anyone else likes it, that is the law of the land here. They are born as obstacles to settlement. Their presence is a hindrance to the expansion of a Zionist state. If they refuse to move, like their ancestors did during the Nakba, then they will be swallowed. The proximity of the village to the settlement is as shocking as the contrast between them. The proximity heightens the contrast. On one side of the fence, there is a gated, well-off community complete with 4-bedroom homes, flush toilets, running water, electricity, 2-car garages, paved driveways, air conditioning, public transit systems, healthcare facilities, and gardens surrounded by soaring eucalyptus trees. On the other side is a village reduced to a refugee camp, with tin shacks, outhouses, no running water, a few solar lights, broken down cars, cinder block homes, tents, stunted olive trees, and 1 deflated soccer ball. I would weep for the children born into this, but their laughter and smiles stop me. They want to show me everything, ask me everything. They're proud of their home. Come, come, they say. Look at our goats. Look at our soccer ball. Have sweet tea. Have coffee. Welcome to our corner of the world, where being born is a cross to bear, a cashable guarantee for future hardship, and also a potent act of resistance. Walking through the village, Tariq shows me how their land keeps getting smaller, how the settlement expands each year, slowly surrounding the village. His grandfather came from Arad in the south as a refugee of the Nakba in 1948 and bought this land with a few other families. The last major demolition was in 2016, but all but 2 buildings in the village, from outhouses to chicken coops to makeshift homes, have a demolition order on them. Settler organizations like Regavim apply pressure to the state and military. There is no law, he says. They know no law. When they had a wedding a few years ago, they forgot to take down a market tent used for the ceremony. A few weeks later, the Israeli Defense Force showed up with a demolition order for the tent. We laugh at the absurdity of it. In 2014, they demolished 6 houses, including his brother's. Now he lives in a shack made from sheet metal that was once a store. This isn't a place for humans, he says. Tariq's brother Bilal, a shepherd with a flock of 50 goats and sheep, tells me he can't do it anymore. This is the last time for us. Here they demolish your buildings. They stop you from building anything new, while they build 10 homes a year in the settlement. They control the land. They surround us. Imagine what it will be like in 10 years. As we talk, the sun and temperature sink lower. Bilal and his son put the goats away in the cave for the night. Tariq tells me of the old Bedouin tents made from goat's hair and adorned with fine embroidery at the skilled hands of women. Here we are, from 1,000 goats and sheep from my grandfather in 1948 to 150 for 16 families. The most valuable thing a human being has is his life, he tells me as the sun disappears. The most valuable thing we have is our lives. As we walk back through the village, picking our way through the gloam, Tariq tells me that while from the outside it may look like the men are in charge, behind the scenes the women rule. We share, it's a giant life that we live together. It's raining for the first time this winter. They say I'm good luck. We sit in the communal tent. All the men are on their phones, tapped into air fiber internet, courtesy of a European NGO. The conversation is loud as they lounge sideways on carpets, propped up on pillows. This is the Bedouin way, Tariq tells me, leaning on his elbow. They argue over what Hollywood actor I look like. A young boy brings sweet tea. Another constantly cleans the entranceway with a broom. A wood stove heats the tent. It's comfortable, warm. Brother, Bilal tells me, when you work an hour, it takes much time. But when you are on Facebook, 1 hour takes a minute. Two men talk about driving through a pop-up checkpoint today where they had their belongings confiscated. It's arbitrary, they say. The soldiers took their jackets, cigarettes, and a Coca-Cola. Tariq says this is a new thing. One man tells me that I had better learn Arabic because that's the only language they speak in heaven. Another says that if you're Palestinian and you even dream about owning a gun, you'll end up in jail. Later, in a separate one-room building, Aid and Tariq show me videos of demolitions they have recorded. Houses, villas, sheep barns, schools, tents, shacks, anything. One elementary school was demolished 3 times. When I ask where the families go, Tariq tells me that other families take them in. It's a good thing that the Palestinian community is so connected, he says. In Palestine, at least in the countryside, you will find no homeless people. December 22nd. Morning in Al-Khair. First darkness. The roosters are the premonition of morning prayer. They wake the wakers. Then a donkey. Then the familiar wavering melody calling the faithful. I rise, walking through the white glow of halogen bulbs, harsh and cold. I take a picture of the settlement's fence, backlit by the security lights. I circle the village, picking my way through the dark over rock and dirt softened by last night's rain. To the east, over the Judean desert, the first hint of dawn appears. A crescent moon rises hours before the sun, so new it appears as an eclipse, a one-sided halo of light around a darkened disk. Maybe the desert is playing tricks on my sleep-deprived eyes. I walk along the village's eastern border through sheep and goat pens, towards the bench where Tariq and I sat yesterday afternoon. My arrival alerts the herd's guard dogs. They bark, growl, circle. I sit and wait. I take a picture of one with an impossibly slow shutter speed. They finally stop. The moon disappears behind thinning clouds. The horizon glows orange. Lights in the village across the valley appear as points. I take abstract long exposures of the sunrise. I watch the dogs. The mother and her puppies play quietly now. I pull out my journal and write. The pages illuminated first by the glaring lights of the settlement, and then, slowly, by the paling sky. I have breakfast with Tariq before he leaves for another day of teaching. Al-Khair olive oil with fresh flatbread and sweet tea. It's the best meal I've had so far. I can feel myself being pulled back here, for olive oil harvest, for a visit, to bring something, to give something. I already fear the changes, the circling of the settlement, the consumption of one way of life for another. The writing appears to be on the wall, or on the razor wire-topped fences, or on the military jeeps, or on the rippling Israeli flags. This machine will take everything from you, and then more, leaving you and your children with what? Can a person survive on dignity alone, with only stoicism and love? This isn't a Beatles song. This is life, and there is a breaking point. How they have not reached it is a testament to their connection to the land, to their ancestors, to their children. It is also a testament to their resilience and adaptability. How long would I last before I sold out and took the exorbitant price offered by the settlers for my grandfather's land? A month? A year? A decade? For them, they are celebrating, if one can call it that, 40 years of living cheek by jowl with their oppressors. Yet here they are, raising goats and sheep, just like those who came before, raising children as they were raised, one difficult day at a time. Every act is a resistance. Every breath defies the odds. After sunrise, I spend time with Bilal as he feeds his flock. We have lived as neighbors for 40 years, he says, waving his hands towards the settlement. In 40 years, never have we thrown a stone. As he cleans the goat pens, a bus, the fancy kind used for overnight travel, with the curving rear-view mirrors, drives through the settlement. They leave every hour, transporting people on Israeli-only highways to their schools and jobs in Jerusalem or beyond. On the small bus back to Hebron, I'm squeezed in the back next to a young man. His name is Muhammad. He's 22. He studies a German textbook as we wind through the cluttering landscape as it shifts from urban to rural. Do you speak German? He asks. No, I reply. We talk about how hard it is to learn, and he shows me the exercises he's working through, different tenses and conjugations. He's learning German to improve his chances of being accepted as a student or refugee in Germany. I love Palestine. I love it so much. But I have to go. Every day Israel kills Palestinians. Today, maybe it's me. Tomorrow, maybe it's me. December 23rd, Hebron. Once again, I sit in the Muslim cemetery beneath two trees, a healthy, full pine and another I don't recognize. Perhaps in the pine family as well, but the needles appear different, finer, more hair-like. Its bark is different too, more scaled than cracked, without the hint of ochre. From here I can see the sounds of the second-hand market to the south, a bustling stretch of curved road that separates two sections of the cemetery. People line the sides, selling anything you can imagine. Socks, backgammon boards, blenders, knockoff Blundstones, ratchet sets, food, mountains of clothes. It's a hive of activity, with deals being made and greetings exchanged. The day is overcast and the air crisp, like a mid-October morning back home, and I find a sense of calm here among the headstones. December 24th. The winter rains have finally arrived, and on my last night in Hebron, a wet chill permeates the apartment building. I turn on one of the little electric heaters for the first time. Evening prayer rings out through the darkness. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm alone, making the distance between here and home feel a little bit longer. I don't know how to describe this experience. Words fall short, pictures the same. The combination of the two together gets closer, but still there's a lot I can't convey through art or otherwise. This place takes my breath away, sometimes in the classic sense of beauty-inspired awe, like when the sun rises behind the city skyline, turning mosque towers into silhouettes, or when the leathery hand of an old gardener holds up the purple bloom of a morning glory so I can see it better. More often, though, it is in the uppercut to the solar plexus kind of way. The things I've seen and heard will stay with me. The Palestinian and Israeli children fighting in the street, reenacting the racism and entrenched oppression they witness every day. The quiet of a once bustling city constricted under military rule. The young Palestinian man studying German on the bus because he feels unsafe in the country he loves, and leaving has become his only option. I'm left with the settling, sinking feeling that the violence here will need to get worse before it gets better. December 25th. Another broken sleep brought me into Christmas Day in Hebron. Although the population is largely Muslim, there's no school today. Despite this, the city is very much alive. Shops opening, vendors uncovering their wares, a group of men gathering around the minced liver stand, others sitting around fires lit in metal waste paper baskets. I pass by it all, the produce market, the calico cat with her kitten, the chicken processing corner with its putrid smell, the gaze of the remote-controlled machine gun, the sleepy eyes of the baby-faced soldier who looks up from his phone to ask for my passport, then up, past the graffiti of the Star of David layered over the mosque stencil, towards Tal Rumaida, but then hang a sharp left, up the steep path with the crumbling rock wall to the right and the quiet houses to the left. I continue on through the garbage that litters the now dirt path, until finally I crest a rise and the olive grove with its trees so full of character that I can't help but imagine them as wizened centenarians with lifetimes of stories to tell, spreads out before me. Beyond the lip of the terraces, the rooftops of the old city layer atop one another, buildings so tightly packed that you can't see a single street. And there, on a low concrete wall, beneath one of those beautiful ancients, I sit in the morning sun and begin to write.
Thank you, Louis, so much. You said you weren't sure how well you could convey what you experienced, but I would say with those beautifully composed and powerful photos, those really detailed and evocative descriptions, you really have managed to convey an awful lot. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to transition now into a question and answer period. And we're trying something a little unusual. We're going to bring Sid back to join us for the Q&A. He's on Zoom, but we won't have video of him. So he will be able to hear what's going on in the room. He will be able to speak, and you'll hear him. And but he's just present on this little laptop at the front. And that's how we're going to see Sid. So if you see the laptop screen, you might as well, you can wave to him. And Marianne will indicate to me when he has something to say. Now, Zainab and Louis are going to come up to the front. And now what are we going to do here for us to... Oh, no. It didn't break. Okay, so we have two portable mics, but John, do we have a mic? Will I be left with a mic? And will Louis have a mic? We've got... We can pass back and forth. So at least we know we've got one portable mic here. Can I give you this to start, and I'll grab the other one? So we have two mic runners, but we might not need both of you. Where is Morag? And Morag's at the back there. And we have Haley. I think we might not need you because we've only got this mic. So Morag will come to you. If you put your hand up because you'd like to say something, then she'll bring the mic to you. She's going to hold on to the mic. And this is mainly for good sound quality. We have found in the past that when we let people hold their own mics, they start talking and they gesticulate with their hands. And you can't hear them anymore. And so Morag will do you a favor and hold it right up close to your mouth.
Who's first?
Yeah, I feel sad. Like, if
I'm on and I'm looking at John.
We can hear you, Sid. We're good.
yeah, I mean, if what we just witnessed was art for art's sake, then that's one thing. You know, it's gorgeous. You're one of my favorite photographers. You're one of my favorite people. And if it's also, if art is also political, then there's a statement that's being made. And what I was afraid of was that the statement would be, there are good guys and bad guys. And that's what it feels like the statement I'm coming away with is there are these innocent, oppressed people that don't have an ounce of aggression, and there are these militaristic, dehumanized people that have everything and are oppressing. And to leave with that message, I don't think inspires peace. So I'm sad. But
Hello? Hello?
Sid, can you hear us? Sorry, Alon.
No. You're muted. Muted.
Can we just mute him for a sec? Yeah. Yeah. As I said before I started, this was a Palestinian informed experience that I went on, and you could go there and have many different experiences, obviously, and very, very different experiences. And I sympathize with, as I said, I sympathize with people being born, settlers being born in the West Bank and feeling that that's their home, because that's how I feel here, The difference is that this is the home of Judaism, and it's also the home of Islam, and it's also the home of Christianity. They all came from this space. I don't believe that the claim of one should override the claim of others, And I think that this movement of people back and taking land from people that are there, there's going to be pushback from that, and that has continued on, and that pushback continues on. And I absolutely agree that there's violence on the other side. I think if you look at the numbers dead on each side, it's very skewed in one direction. And I don't know much what else to say about it. I mean, I think a lot about, I don't know that I would have been eligible for a Birthright Israel tour, maybe, I don't know. But I think a lot about how different that experience would have been to this experience, and what that story would feel like compared to this one. So anyway, I appreciate you coming along, and yeah.
I'd like to add that it is sad. It is sad. The world is very sad. A lot of things that are happening are very sad, and I think being part of this event, this presentation, it's bringing a voice to the table that hasn't been at the table, and as celebratory as that may be, it's important. Like, if we really want to have a conversation, I think everybody needs to be at the table. And until then, the conversation is not complete. So.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you. I had a bit of hesitation about posing this question because I don't want to put this question all on the presenters, and I recognize this is an extremely heavy subject, matter, and I'm still feeling the weight of that presentation. And yeah, I guess just something that I was wondering or reflecting on, and I think we could all possibly reflect on, is where do we find the distinction between a violence that is aimed to oppress and a violence that is aimed to liberate? Is there a distinction there? Can we condemn both equally? Yeah, I know there's no easy answer for that, but it's a thought at least. Thank you again for a beautiful and powerful presentation.
Is Sid with us? No. Because I would like to hear Sid's perspective on that. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you probably know where I stand on that. You know, I don't necessarily believe in violence, but I also understand pushback, and I don't feel like I can judge that, you know. And I also think that hurt people, and that's often how these things roll forward, you know. But I don't have much more to say on that, but thank you. Oh, we have a question here.
Hi, my name's Keith Simmons. I was an ecumenical accompanier. World Council of Churches sends human rights observers into Palestine, and I was one of those for 2.5 months in Bethlehem. And I just want to echo everything you've said, and what you saw, I saw. And many of us have seen CPT and ecumenical accompaniers and other folk who have been there to try and just stand and witness and try and be a presence that maybe calms things down a little bit, but I often wonder if you have that effect. Thank you for being witness, and to say that there are many people I met who are Israelis, Jewish Israeli people, who are incensed at the occupation, who are struggling against it, who name it as apartheid, who are trying to rebuild destroyed Palestinian homes, who are working hard and standing as strongly as they can in the face of what their country is doing, because they see it as something that demeans their country and themselves, and a way that oppresses them as well as Palestinians. There is, as you said, there are. I remember talking to a Palestinian lawyer for Adamir who represents prisoners who have no hope, talking about needing to be a voice for those folks, because at least their hope lay in the fact that somebody knew what was going on for them. And her saying, please don't tell the world we're a depressed, sad people. Tell them we're a depressed, happy people. We are still a people that live and breathe and dream and dance and sing, and we are still those people. There are a number of people in Canada. I think the narrative is changing a lot now. I'm part of the United Church of Canada, and part of a network called the Center for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, where people are trying to uphold BDS and other ways to convince the government of Israel that there are other ways to do things, that they need to stop doing what they were doing, that we could follow in the path of resistance to South Africa and resist apartheid in Palestine as well. So there are ways to do that, and hopefully we'll come together and be part of those ways of resistance. And also, we can support Palestinians, we can buy Palestinian products, we can continue to support Palestinians who are struggling to stay alive on that land.
Hey, John, can you give me this one too?
Just have to turn it on.
Oh yeah, there we go. There's one from Randy down here.
Hi. Oh, that's loud. I just wanted to respond to the great question that was raised up here. You worded it really well about the two different types of violence. One to uphold an unjust regime, and one to bring about liberation. I think one thing we can get stuck on is how we define violence, and one is that it's reinforced by our mainstream media how the violence is these clashes, rockets from Gaza, a response from Israeli Defense Forces. It dies down after a few days, and then it's like the violence is over. I think what we're talking about here, the message that we're getting tonight, is violence is in the form of structural violence in the form of apartheid. And when all the rockets die down and on both sides die down, the violence incurs every day for the Palestinians. It's death by 1,000 little things every single day. That stuff doesn't make the news. And I just want to, again, the mainstream media reinforce this idea, if they could only just get along, right? They're all just shooting rockets at each other. They only could just stop, and then things would be okay. And we forget about it when the rockets are done. But for Palestinians, that violence continues every single day.
Okay, so we seem to have 3 microphones now, and if you have something to say and you raise your hand, then we'll be able to stay 1 or 2 or 3 people ahead, because Morag has a microphone and she's up here. Who else would like to speak? Yeah.
I just have a question about the gendered nature of what you experienced there. It's really prominent to me how the young men are being used to deploy violence, and yeah, did you witness or experience the web of female care on either side that's like still holding life together? We didn't get to see much of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't experience it that much. It's my interactions, especially in the South Hebron Hills, were the majority were with men, except for with the CPT team itself. There's majority women in that CPT team, and that was very eye-opening. I learned a lot through them, but I think also that Hebron is one of the most conservative cities in the West Bank when it comes to Islam, and there is a very strong gender role society there, and especially like going out to those soccer games or whatever, seeing that it's almost entirely men and young men mostly, you know. So I didn't cross that boundary very much. There was one woman who was the leader of all the shopkeepers in the old city, and she was very prominent and very out there. And like I said, the young women on the team are very progressive and very forward thinking, and I learned a lot through them about one of them. There was a picture of her, Amira, and she's wearing a hijab, and she said, these people come here and tell me that I'm oppressed because I'm wearing a hijab, and who are they to come and tell me that? You know, I wear this, and I know why I wear this, and who are they to say otherwise? And so I learned a lot through them about it, but I wasn't able to cross that boundary so much. But I think you're absolutely right. They are there holding things together. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, who did you teach photography to, and what camera were you using?
I was using a little camera called the Fuji X100V, fixed lens, so it was all taken on that camera and one little fixed 35mm lens. And I taught photography to the team. I taught them video and photography. And they run a program called Through the Lens, where they give little point-shoot cameras to Palestinian kids and teach them some stuff, and then they go and document things in their life, and then they put together a little show. And I really wanted to do that while I was there, and things moved slowly there. And there was sort of this like, oh yeah, we were having trouble getting a hold of the teacher, and then it was like, I think this Saturday, and then the one team member's like, well, he did say inshallah, which means if God wills, if Allah wills it. So I was like, yeah, well, maybe not, and sure enough, it didn't happen. So unfortunately, I didn't get to do that. So the photography teaching and stuff was mostly just with the team itself, you know, because they have great cameras and they're always using them. So, yeah.
Did you get some photos from them? Or is that coming, maybe?
I mean, they're always taking photos. Like their website is totally populated with the photos that the team takes there. You know, I also gave them my photos to use, but yeah, they're wonderful and super intelligent and inquisitive, and they pick stuff up super fast. And also, them photographing each other for an hour was the funniest thing I've ever been a part of. It was just outrageous. But yeah, they're full of joy, and I think they learned a lot. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Hello. So I just wanted to say, well, actually, I don't really know how to say it, but what I wanted to really articulate and communicate is a big thank you for sharing your experience, because I am Palestinian. My mother and father are here too, and my grandparents, who are no longer with us from my father's side, were from there. And as someone who's never got to go there, that wants to go there one day, I just really want to say thank you for sharing that story and showing like the human side of it, how it's not just numbers and statistics, it's not just like images, there are people there living this, and I feel like that's one of the biggest things that we just distance ourselves from. So really thank you for going there, for experiencing it, for sharing your story, and I really think you should write a book and publish it.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, in this moment where no hands are up, I'd like to actually respond to you, Alon, because it seems to me that your comment expressed some pain, that you'd like some recognition that there has been pain and violence that Jewish Israelis have suffered too, and I do want to acknowledge that. And I went and got our card, because sometimes we can take the time to write words that in the moment elude us. I'd just like to read sort of the bottom part, because it's something that's really important to me. On the side that says no one is free where others are oppressed, we wrote, in a conflict that is characterized by polarization and where extremist platforms receive so much attention, we support voices and nurture collaborations that recognize the dignity and safety of all people living in Palestine and Israel. And I know it's a very hard thing to do, to overcome polarization. We're working on it. But it requires understanding a sort of a both and, mindset, that we can recognize injustices that happen to people who may see each other as enemies, and we can see the injustice and the pain of everyone. And there are some really beautiful examples that I know of in Israel where people are coming together across that divide and across the deepest divide of the pain that they share. And these are parents and other family members who have lost loved ones to the violence. And it's called the Parents Circle. And Jewish and Palestinian families come together, and it must be the hardest thing you can imagine, right? They've each lost someone to the other side, and yet they find in that some commonality. so as deeply painful as that is, there's also beauty there. There's also a sense that if they can do that, maybe we can too. And there are schools too, where Jewish families and Palestinians are sending their children together to school, bilingual schools, where they each learn each other's languages, and they learn to live in peace. And these are small examples, but they're hopeful examples. They're people demonstrating that it's possible. So maybe we can have an event where we learn more about the schools. Okay, so we can hear from Sid now. Wonderful.
Thanks, folks. I am uncomfortable with the both sides approach to Israel and Palestine. One people came and displaced another. One people has occupied the land of the other. One people subjects the other to discriminatory treatment within Israel and sets up settlements on their land in the occupied territories. There is surely pain among Israelis, but that's not the equivalent of the oppressor and the oppressed. The pain of the two is different. And I think that dialogue is not sufficient means of redressing this situation. We have to realize who has the power, who dominates, who is backed by powerful international forces like the United States, the European Union, and Canada, and what they're doing, protected at the United Nations, sold armaments, etc. So I think that what we really need to do is focus on who is the powerful, responsible party here, and to focus on changing the behavior of that party.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Encouraging me to talk. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for this presentation. You did a very good job. I appreciate it. I am proud of being Muslim, and I'm proud of being Palestinian. As a Muslim and as a Palestinian, I believe the truth and the peace and justice will prevail. And the question is, how can we be part of it? How can we be part of ending this occupation and this oppression? By doing this, what you did, I think this is part of it. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions about the artistic collaboration? Bessie had to go home because, migraine. But, great. You're willing to take the questions, right? Yeah.
Yeah, again, also want to say thank you for putting this conversation on. It's the first type of conversation I've been part of. And my heart is racing because it's really personal to me as well. And I really appreciate what you just said too. I think this is part of it. This is part of the solution, to come together and try to have this conversation. So I appreciated the both and, like, who is in power, and also on an individual level, being able to look each other in the eye and speak openly. So I'm wondering, Zainab, how did you guys begin your artistic collaboration with so much emotional, ancestral heaviness?
I'd never met Bessie. I'd never talked to Bessie or met her really since I've lived here, and but I know of her, and I know of her artistic expression and creations, and so I went to her house. That's how it started. After we agreed, I went to her house. We had tea, And we talked for like 2 hours before doing anything, and shared stories about our history, about our families, about our artistic creations. You know, she's written a play researching her family line, and she wrote a play about it. And I don't remember what I shared, but we just talked. Like probably talked about my grandmother. And then after we'd met a few times, we were collaborate. You know, like we had back and forth. I shared the poem. It was back and forth, but I think it was like the third time we met, I asked her, I said, "What do you think our ancestors think?" And then I said, "I bet you they set this up." You know, and yeah. I think it's harder for like my mother, you know? And in this context, it's art, so it feels a little bit more safe. But yeah, it's like a hard bridge to cross. And even singing that song, like, there were moments where I didn't want to do it. I'm like, they're bombing, like, it's like the war is still going on, like, right now, you know, like, do I really want to sing an Arabic and Arabic and Hebrew song about peace? Like, but I really believe in the power of word, and that words are like, they call in, and so even though there isn't peace there, and I don't know if, you know, I don't know if there ever will be, but I think that these little things make a difference, as hard as they are, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. I know it was a long evening, and be safe. And Jenny has some things to say.
I just want to thank you all so much for coming out and for your attention for such a long program. I need to offer personal thanks and also thanks on behalf of the college to tonight's presenters and performers, Louis Bockner, Zainab Mohammed, Bessie Wapp, Sid Schneid, and to our technical wizards, John Tucker, who was also incredibly generous in allowing us to use this space, which is really the music program space, and Adam Thomas, Terry Brennan, who have been doing the live streaming. We've got members of the Mirror Lecture Series Working Circle and volunteers here. Maybe I won't run through everybody's names, but give them your appreciation, please. Go in peace.